Welcome to another episode of our Mental Health Moments. My name is Linda Gallick. I'm the Health and Wellbeing Consultant at Bellin Health, and I am once again joined by Hannah Bauer. Hannah is one of our behavioral health therapists with our Bellin Psychiatric Center. So, hi, Hannah. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you so
Good.
much for taking the time today.
Yes.
So, Hannah and I had a great discussion. Last time we were together, we talked about the effects of winter and kind of getting through that. And now we're sitting at a time where we got a little bit more daylight. We have a little bit of snow. But one of the things that just keeps coming up in conversation and keeps coming in front of us, and we know that our viewers are interested in this, and so we really can never talk enough about it, is really managing stress, really managing
Mhm.
that stress. And one of the things, Hannah, that you noticed that you were sharing with me is the idea that usually people kind of get through the holidays, you see a lot of extra patients, and then it kind of
Mhm.
tapers off. And this year seems different. So, you want to share a little
Yeah.
bit more with us about that? What do you think is going on?
Sure. I think there's probably a lot of different things that are going on. I mean, the weather's been kind of unpredictable. So I think that's difficult for people to adjust to. We have these expectations that winter's going to be long and cold, and you ready yourself for that. And then when it's not, it takes some adjustment. And then, kind of like today, you get to that point where you're like, okay, like it's just going to be nice out. That's fine. Then it snows and gets cold. So I
Yeah.
think that's hard, and that's kind of disappointing for adults, for kids, for kind of everyone, changes plans. And I'm also noticing just a lot of illness. So a lot of coughs
Hmm.
that just aren't going away, a lot of like random stomach
Yes.
bugs, ear infections, just a lot of that. And then, and it's not just kids. I've been quite surprised by the number of adults that I'm seeing or the number of adults that have had to cancel appointments because they have
Mm.
such a bad like head cold, so that impacts what they're able to do, who they're able to see and interact with, if they're
Hmm.
able to show up to work. So I think there's a lot of just different stressors that typically we would see. They'd just be kind of spaced out a little bit. So it's kind of easier to navigate. But now that it's just like week after week when people just are not feeling like themselves, that's really
Yeah.
stressful.
Yeah, so when that's happening to somebody, what do you recommend as far as, when do we need to be paying attention that that's actually something really affecting our mental health? So we get an illness and we're out of some things
Mhm.
for a while. Obviously, people get sick from time to time, but what do we need to really be concerned with in terms of monitoring mental health in ourselves and maybe those that we care about?
Yeah, so something that I usually recommend that people do, and it's not anything like labor intensive, but just like tracking and monitoring our moods, because obviously when you get sick, you're not going to be the most pleasant, right? But we know that after a certain period of time, like that's going to end and we're going to probably start to feel better. But what I'm seeing is like, people just, they're not feeling better. So I think it's helpful to just track like how many days have I been physically feeling like this and
Mm,
how miserable am I? Like, am I noticing that I'm
mhm.
just not myself? Am I a little bit irritable? Are people like not interacting with me as much just because I've
Mm,
been kind of lashing out? I think reflection is really helpful. I think it's also really great to have a support system and people that you can trust, that when they say, hey, you have not seemed like yourself, you can trust that they are telling you the truth because they're going to notice some of those changes in you that you won't notice in yourself. They're going to be able to
mhm.
keep track of those things too because they're going to know if you've lashed out, right? They're going to know, if you've been a little bit short or if you've been a little bit more withdrawn, a lot more than you might even recognize.
Mhm,
So just
mhm.
having some people that you trust around you, I think that's also really
Yes.
helpful, and taking that advice, taking that input, and really taking it to heart. Yeah.
And sometimes we have to turn to those. They're like the truth tellers in our lives,
Yes.
right? Like they don't just sugarcoat everything. Sometimes they tell us
Right.
the things that we just need to hear. Like, hey,
Yes.
I'm noticing this about you.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's nice because those are also the people that, like, they're gonna notice it. Maybe they don't say anything right away, but, like, it goes in their brain and, like, "Okay, well, this was odd, and then this
Mhm,
happened." So they're not the people that
mhm.
are just gonna, like, brush things under the rug. They notice that something's wrong, and they're gonna pay attention, which, again, is really helpful because that you need to know when something is just not right with you, and if it persists, maybe it is time to go in. Maybe it's something to talk about. Maybe it's just, you know, maybe things are just too much. And
Yeah.
that's totally okay. That
Yeah.
happens. This is a hard year for a lot of people, so if you
Mhm.
need a little bit of that extra support for a couple of months and you can feel
Mhm.
better, I definitely, I recommend that to people all the time. I'm like, if you just feel like this is a rough time, come in a little bit more often.
Mhm.
Like that's totally fine. And it's nice with the
Yeah.
virtual visits. It's really nice being able to offer
Mm.
people like stay home, like we'll have sessions. You guys can be
Yeah.
comfortable in your pajamas, wrapped up in a blanket if you're not feeling well, but then we can still talk and check in too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I've noticed lately, unfortunately, is not only some of those short-term illnesses like flus and
Mhm.
colds and the viruses going around, but just more like really serious illnesses that are happening. There just seems to be a lot of it lately, and maybe it's just hitting
Yeah.
closer to home for me. But people with cancers and more of those
Mhm.
really life-altering illnesses. So I think this is an example of, whether it's you yourself that are going through it or it's someone that you love and care about,
Mhm.
obviously that puts you in a whole different realm of
Right.
stress. So
Yes.
what can people do to help themselves, through those
Yeah.
periods?
So something that I recommend. So if you're given, excuse me, if you're given like a diagnosis or something that's really big, something I stress is to not go Google crazy, right? Like don't
Mm,
get on your phone, don't get on your computer and just look up a bunch of stuff because most of the
mm-hmm,
stuff that you're going to have access to, number one, some of it's really just hard to understand. And number two, most of the articles and information that you're going to get right off the bat is really just the attention grabbing stuff that's not going to make you
mm-hmm.
feel very good.
Yeah.
So, writing down questions, making sure that you're going directly to your providers if they have information to give to you, that they can print it out and that they can hand it to you. And then that's where you get your information from. So that's something I definitely recommend. And I also tell people it's not that you have to broadcast all of this information, but like pick one or two people that you want to update. You want them to be aware of everything that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And it's helpful to have, more than one person just because if it's overwhelming for you, if you're picking a loved one to share this with, it's probably going to be overwhelming for them.
Yeah.
So being able to have two to three other people that you can kind of delegate certain things to or talk about certain things with, and making sure that they can handle it, I think that's also very helpful. And if it's a loved one that's being, getting this really hefty diagnosis or they're the ones that are being affected, it's really your first instinct is like you want to be very helpful and you want to be there and you want to do all of the things, but we really have to check in with ourselves first,
Mm,
because this information, while it's not
mhm.
a direct effect to us, we still have to make sure that we can handle it, and we have to be okay with saying, you know what, like I have really been struggling today. I really want to be there for you, but I need a day to myself so I can be of use to you. We have to be
Mhm.
okay with saying no. We have to be okay with really prioritizing our health so we can be there for those loved ones.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing because you feel like you're letting them down, but at the same time,
Yeah.
if you're not taking care of yourself, you're not going to be helpful to anybody. And that's important too.
So I heard a couple of things I
Yeah.
really want to expand on a little bit because a couple of things really spoke to me and I want to talk more about it. So number one, the idea that there needs to be boundaries, whatever you're
Yeah.
experiencing, there needs to be boundaries. And then the other thing I'd like to talk a little bit more about is kind of that impact of social media. Because you even said
Yeah.
just, Googling and finding, what do you find? You
Mhm.
find sensationalized things. So just the impact that
Yes.
has on our stress level. So let's start with boundaries.
Okay.
Because I love talking about boundaries. That's such a good one. That's just such a good one because Hannah,
Mhm.
I just feel like we can't remind people enough that it is okay to set
Yes.
boundaries and it's okay to say no and it's okay
Yes.
to not be the
Yes.
superhero that is
Yes.
perfect and takes care of everything.
Mhm.
This is what I love to
Yes.
remind people of, but it comes better
Yes.
from you because
Yes, it's such an important, and it's a skill, you right? So it takes practice to get
mm-hmm.
comfortable because the first time you say no, it does not feel good. And then you have all those worries of, well, am I disappointing someone? Are their feelings going to be hurt? Are they going to be mad at me? It takes a lot of practice to recognize where your responsibility ends, right?
Mhm.
Because really, your responsibility is to yourself first and foremost. And so sometimes that is going to put you in a position where you have to say no. And if that hurts someone else's feelings, that's not necessarily your responsibility to fix.
Right.
Like when it's an adult saying no to another adult, that adult should be able to manage their feelings, and if they can't,
Mhm.
that's also not your responsibility to fix.
Mhm. Mhm.
There's so many
Yeah.
habits that are formed when people are so used to you saying yes and they're so used to you being that person that they've got to unpack why they're so comfortable coming to you with all of these things when they know that you have a lot on your plate. That's not always on you to be that agreeable person. And it's okay if someone's feelings are hurt. It's not intentional. Again, like that's on them to process those feelings. Maybe they come to you and you talk about it. But at the end of the day, a lot of the boundaries that we need to set, they're around people that love and care about us. That's
Mhm.
why it's so hard.
Yeah.
They want what's best for you. Even if they don't necessarily see that, you know, they they want what's best for you. So it might be hard for them. It might be a huge adjustment. I see this especially with moms. They
Yeah.
tend to be the end all be all for their
Mhm.
families. They know what's going on when. They're the ones that the kids go to, that their parents go to, siblings. They have to be okay with saying no. And 9 times out of 10, people are okay with it. And then that one time that they're not, that's still not their responsibility. That's on the other people. They have to cope, they have to adjust. It's uncomfortable. It takes some practice, but you can't stretch
Mm.
yourself so thin that when you actually want to reach out and help someone that you don't have anything to give.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so important because nobody knows what it feels like to be you.
Right.
You're the only one that knows what's going on inside of
Mhm.
you. And so for someone else to say, well, you have to do this or you can't say no or
Right.
whatever, they don't know really everything that you're
Right.
thinking, feeling, managing. And so you do have to be your own
Yeah.
advocate.
Yes. Yes. And,
Yeah.
yeah, especially even like in work settings or things like that where people just have certain expectations. A lot of times things are not framed as a question. So you feel like you don't have a choice. But
Mhm.
I like to remind people like you always have an option. You always have a choice. It may not be obvious. It may not
Mhm.
be consequence free, but realistically you will always have a choice and you just have to decide really what do you have the capacity to do without causing harm to yourself? Because if there's going to be harm, is it worth it? And most of the time it's
Right.
not.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Hmm.
Good, good. So then let's talk a little bit about news and media and all of those types of
Hmm.
things because I think that over time, the one thing that I've noticed is that people almost, you see things in media, on social media,
Hmm.
and I always think, would someone say this in
Right.
person? Would they
Yeah.
say it in person? So there's a lot of stress and negativity floating around out there. And then you brought up a
Hmm.
great point too, like don't start Googling things because the
Yes.
sensationalized stuff tends to be to
Yes.
the top. So
Hmm.
how do you recommend to people that they kind of manage their media consumption, shall we say? Because I think that a
Yeah.
lot of us are just kind of glued to our phones all the time and we're always
Yes.
in technology. So how do we kind of monitor that for
Yeah.
ourselves?
So I think the first thing, and I've talked with, adults, teenagers alike, is just kind of knowing your options within social media. Like you don't have to be exposed to everything. You
Hmm.
can unfollow certain things, you can,
Hmm.
hide certain things. Some people like to set like a timer on their phone so that they're allotted, but they're not constantly just doom scrolling and just filling their brains with
Hmm.
all this concern and like you don't realize
Hmm.
how fast time goes. And then that's all the information that you have. Um, I think it's really important also just to get again kind of check in with yourself because a lot of the stuff that we see is sensationalized or it's just bad. I think a lot of the news that we get, a lot of the information we get, most of it's not very positive. So checking like how is this making you feel and how relevant is this information? Are you really exposed to things that are helpful, that are local, that are informative, that are useful to you? Or if it's not, and if it maybe you've reached that limit where you're like, I want this information, but like emotionally I can't take it, that's okay. You can not don't turn on the TV, right?
Mm-hmm.
Don't
Mm-hmm.
automatically go to some of these sites. If you have to, block them for a while if you just can't handle that. I know a lot
Yeah.
of people around the beginning of the year, they go on like almost like a social media fast where
Mm.
they're not on it for a couple of months.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's important too, just to remind yourself like that is not the only way to get information. You will survive without it. You'll be able to connect with people without it. And life can go on so that you can create a healthier balance so you're not so reliant. Um,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of options, and I think sometimes we forget that we don't need social media. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be there. And also, just because it's there doesn't mean that you have to give yourself an unlimited amount. There's
Yeah.
there's a threshold where it just becomes harmful
Yeah.
and overwhelming, and we have to be honest with ourselves about that.
And I even just think the media in general, I mean, sometimes I'll turn on
Mhm.
the evening news and just the way they're phrasing things and just the tone
Yes.
in their voices, like they are emanating fear and they're
Yes.
making me feel fearful. And I'm thinking, I don't know that I need this today.
Yes.
There's just days where
Yes.
you're like, nope, I don't think I need that. And I
Yes.
remember just really early on, I used to work in the news business a million years ago. And that is literally why I left, because it
Mhm.
was negative and it was
Yes.
sensationalizing things that were
Mhm.
not sensational. So
Yes.
like I
Yes.
know from being behind those scenes that is your goal. You're trying to
Yes.
make something scary
Mhm.
enough or big enough to draw in
That it
people's
hooks people in.
attentions. So
Yes.
it's important, I think, for us to just educate people on that.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
don't get rolled into that and let that
Yeah.
affect your mental well-being.
Yes. And we're lucky enough to live at a time where like information is just so readily available. Like
Hmm.
there's certain, people that I see that like they take in a lot of news, whether it's on their phone or the TV or the radio. And I'm like, it came to a point where I was just like, you can't anymore. You have to turn off the radio, you have to turn off the TV. You cannot be looking at all of these articles on your phone. And of course there's that concern of like, well, how am I supposed to know if something's happening? Again, remind yourself that if something really big and important is happening, you will find out. Someone will
Yeah.
tell you. There will be
Hmm.
an alert on your phone. There will be alert that comes through. Like you will know if there is something that
Hmm.
it's really important.
Yeah.
People are going to let you know. You don't need all of the sensationalized information, and some of it's incorrect information too. You don't need that in order to inform your decision on like what you're going to have for dinner. Like
Yeah.
there's so
Right.
many staples in a day that you can make those decisions about that the news does not
Yeah.
impact that.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think again, just, trying to also be aware of what makes you feel good, what fulfills you,
Yes.
what gives you something positive in your day. So
Yes.
you can have feeds or you can look up information
Yeah.
that will aid you in a
Yes.
day and not add to your stress, but actually add
Yes.
more to your peace and your
Yes.
calmness too.
Yes, and that is another reminder, like you can hide or snooze or unfollow some of those negative things. Like it's not a
Yeah.
requirement. You can take in the information that you know is going to make you feel good, or you can like even subscribe to certain things that they'll send you some of those positive news stories that kind of
Yeah,
fall to the
yeah,
wayside that are really
right.
helpful. Yeah.
I just recommend a lot of pet sites, just,
Yes,
anything
yes,
puppy, anything.
yes.
There's some fun stuff out there that just,
Yeah.
yeah, gives you a smile or
Mhm.
gives you a giggle for the day,
Yes.
and is
Mhm.
something uplifting, rather than
Yes.
something that causes
Yes,
more
and it's
stress.
hard, because you have to deliberately, like, look for those things because 'cause they're not just in plain sight, but it's
Yeah,
definitely
that's true.
worthwhile.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because those algorithms are all at work
Yes.
too, and that's what we don't realize
Yes.
either is they're trying
Mhm.
they're trying to rope you in. They're
Yes.
trying to bring you
Yes.
in. Yeah.
Mhm.
Good stuff. Good
Yeah.
stuff. Well, any final thoughts, Hannah, on stress or helping people manage it or what people can pay attention to and anything else you wanted to share with our audience today?
Um, I mean, sure. Like the biggest thing I think in terms of stress management is it's all the little things.
Mm,
It's a lot of the small habits that we don't even aware, you're not even aware are habits because we're so busy day to day. Um, which is why again, like I stress, just slowing things down. Usually what I recommend is, at the end of a school or work day, check in with yourself. Like, how was that day? Were there some
mm,
high points? Were there some low points? How are you feeling right now? What do you need? For a lot of adults and kids, they need maybe half an hour just to decompress. If
yeah.
a lot of kids, I mean, they like TV, adults like TV. Sometimes it's nice to be able to shut your brain off a little bit when you've been
Mm-hmm.
busy all day.
Mm-hmm.
Put a time limit on it. Make sure
Mm-hmm.
that you're drinking plenty of water, make sure that you're eating throughout the day. All these little
Mm-hmm.
things that you have to be
Yeah.
deliberate about initially until they become habits, but just checking in with yourself. And then I usually recommend again, before bedtime, right? Like just have a little bit of time to reflect, mostly focus on some of those positive things that happen throughout the day, and then creating a nightly routine. Listen to some music if you have to, take a shower, what are those some of those things that can help ready your body to rest because you need the rest because you can't really cope with stress if you are going on 2 hours of sleep and you're trying to get all these things done.
Yeah.
So, yeah, just
Yeah.
taking the time to take care of your body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So agree. So agree. So
Yeah.
much good stuff there. And that is why, we always talk about the connection between physical
Yeah.
well-being and mental well-being. We can't
Yes.
we can't expect to feel great if we don't do some of the things
Yes.
that our body really needs
Mhm.
us to do to
Yeah,
feel our best.
exactly.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Awesome. Well, so much great information, Hannah. Can't thank you enough for all of that. If you have questions, if there is anything that you would like Hannah and I to talk about in future episodes or things that you're curious about that we can bring you in this content, please let us know. You can drop us a comment on this podcast, or you can feel free to send us an email, Bellin Wellness Consultant at bellin.org. Give us your questions and ideas. We would love to hear them. So, thank you, Hannah, for being here today. Really
You're very
appreciate your
welcome.
time. And
Yes.
thanks to all of you for listening today. Hope you have a great rest of the day. Please like, subscribe, and share this podcast. Thanks, everyone.